Welcome to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast. Once again, thank you to our recent patrons, Lieutenant Generals Jim Fadler and Nicholas Gelber, and Major Generals Doug Gatto, Thomas T, Pseudocats, Jack Boyer, and Down Order Podcast. Thank you all. For all the info on becoming a patron of the podcast, just head to patreon.com, that's patreon.com/The History Network. There's a video of Angus and myself there explaining what we want to do from season 26 onwards, along with all the blurb about it. By signing up now, rest assured that no tip pledges will be taken until and if we release season 26, episode 1. The HistoryNetwork.org podcast, season 25, episode 8, William Billy Bishop, part 2. This episode was written by Michael Gaby Gross. Michael received his master's degree in history from the California State University, Sacramento. His thesis project analysed the Phoenix Program, a CIA counterinsurgency operation during the Vietnam War. On May the 7th, the Royal Flying Corps suffered one of their greatest losses when the great Albert Ball was shot down near Annoeullin, France. Ball had just scored his 44th victory and was pursuing another plane when he disappeared into a cloud. When he reappeared, his plane was falling from the sky and his propeller was motionless. Ball fell from the sky and his plane crashed some distance away. Lothar von Richthofen, the Red Baron's younger brother, was officially credited with the kill. Ball's death had a profound impact on his fellow flyers, especially Bishop. Shortly before his death, Ball attempted to recruit Bishop for a daring raid on German airfields. It occurred to me that it's awfully inefficient always to wait until enemy planes are in the air to attempt to destroy them, Ball told Bishop. My idea is to pull off an attack, you and I, on the aerodromes around Douai. The two aces would take flight in the early morning before dawn and surprise the Germans before they could even pull their planes out of the hangars. Bishop liked the idea and would await Ball's instruction on when the attack was to take place. With Ball's death, Bishop feared that such an attack would never happen. In the meantime, Bishop was due for a visit to London, but not before he took another solo flight and scored another 2 kills. In London he received good news. He had been awarded the Distinguished Service Order. His citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and devotion to duty, while in a single-seater he attacked 3 hostile machines, 2 of which he brought down, although in the meantime he was himself attacked by 4 other hostile machines. His courage and determination have set a fine example to others." His celebrity continued to grow, not just in England, but now back home in Canada. Part of what added to the legend was his chance meeting with the great Red Baron himself. Bishop's squadron engaged the flying circus, and soon he found himself isolated. Richthofen recognized the blue-nosed plane and signalled for his squadron to back away. He and Bishop engaged in an extended dogfight, with neither man gaining an edge. One moment Bishop had the Red Baron in his sights and unleashed a stream of bullets, while another moment saw Bishop dodging fire from the red triplane. Soon both pilots ran out of ammunition, and Bishop took the opportunity to escape. The two would never meet again. Upon landing, Bishop treated the meeting as a failure, but the other pilots were thrilled to see he had survived against the most dangerous ace of the war. Aces on both sides of the war had their own style toward aerial combat. Bishop was never the strongest flyer, so he needed to excel in other areas. He was known for his marksmanship even since he was a boy, and Bishop used that skill in the air. When he was unsuccessful in a fight or on one of his rare days off, Bishop could be found conducting target practice. His tactics in the air mirrored those he used as a boy against bullies. He would fly directly into an enemy formation, forcing them to break away, lest they crash into him. From there he would chase down 1 or 2 planes and dart away before the enemy could retaliate. From Ball, Bishop learnt to hide in the clouds and await the perfect moment to strike. It was a matter of flying into an enemy's blind spot under the tail and firing into the bottom of the fuselage. The enemy pilots did not know what hit them. Every victory for Bishop meant the deaths of 1 or 2 young men very similar to himself. To cope, Bishop chose to look at his victories in a different light. To bring down a machine did not seem to me to be killing a man. It was more as if I was just destroying a mechanical target with no human being in it. I did not relish the idea even of killing Germans, yet when in a combat in the air it seemed more like any other kind of sport, and to shoot down a machine was very much the same as if one were shooting down clay pigeons. He did occasionally lose sleep over the fact that he ended lives, but he also understood that if he hesitated, an enemy would have shot him down. This competitive spirit within Bishop pushed him to keep scoring victories in his quest to be the highest scoring ace of the war. Upon his return to the front on May 22nd, he learned a bit of news that got his competitive juices flowing. The Germans had placed a bounty on his head. Now, instead of avoiding his blue-nose plane, the Germans would seek him out. This only encouraged Bishop to attempt something more daring. Despite his death, Ball's plan to attack a German aerodrome never left Bishop's mind. He debated whether such a mission was worth the risk, especially since he would be undertaking it alone. He also knew such an attack had never been done before, and he could add several kills to his name before the enemy could properly respond. He took flight in the early morning of June the 2nd, telling only a few members of his squadron where he was going. He flew straight for his target aerodrome, but to his dismay there was no sign of activity. Everyone was either asleep or it was abandoned. Now, in a foul mood, Bishop flew off, hoping to find something to shoot. By chance he stumbled across another German aerodrome, this one with planes preparing for the daily mission. I pointed my nose to the ground and opened fire with my gun, scattering bullets all around the machines and coming down to 50 feet in doing so. Then clearing off to one side, I watched the fun. The Germans scrambled into their planes, but Bishop shot at the machines, causing damage. For the few planes able to reach the runway, Bishop took them down one at a time. With his ammunition exhausted and a smile on his face, Bishop headed for home. He added 3 more kills to his record, which was loyally confirmed by Major Scott. Life at the aerodrome was not always serious. The pilots and mechanics enjoyed drinking, singing and dancing until the early hours of the morning. Some took flight, hungover and exhausted. The men would celebrate the day's victories, celebrate those that did not return, or just celebrate for the sake of celebrating. They would pour out alcohol liberally, taking joy in those that seemed to make the biggest mess. After a particularly poor singing performance, Bishop blamed the piano. "We can't have a dry piano in this mess," said Bishop, and poured a quart of champagne into the instrument. It was 3 o'clock in the morning before the weary, happy celebrants made their way to bed for a few hours' sleep before the dawn patrol. The crews understood their life expectancy in the air was likely very short, so they made the most of their time while still alive. By the end of July, the squadron was upgraded with new airplanes. They received the new Royal Aircraft Factory SE-5s, much faster and heavier armed than the Nieuport 17s, but the SE-5s also had bugs to work out. For a pilot such as Bishop, who was never much of a flyer, it was a difficult process. The machine guns failed several tests, as the new interrupter gear failed to prevent the pilots from destroying their own propellers. Once fixed, Bishop had to get used to flying the new machine. Following his second victory in the new plane, Bishop crashed into a group of trees after an anti-aircraft shell caused him to lose altitude. Bishop was just able to crawl out of the burning plane before passing out. British soldiers pulled him away from the wreckage and eventually drove him back to his airfield. Bishop wrote to his fiancée Margaret, "I don't suppose my nerves will last more than 3 months out here. They are getting shaky now. I find myself shuddering at chances I didn't think anything of taking 6 weeks ago." The war was beginning to take its toll, and he needed time away to refresh and calm himself. He was granted leave and would return with new vigour. But in August he received news that would take him away from flying for some time. He was being awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest award available in the British Armed Services. Ordered to London to receive his medal, Bishop feared it would mean the end of his time in the sky. He did not want to become a symbol to be shielded in safety. He returned to London as ordered and attended a reception in his honour. He was uneasy at this attention and not looking forward to the next day when he would meet King George himself. He was trembling. Any fears he had known in the air had been mild compared to this. His heart had raced when he had found himself trapped by the flying circus, but his hand had been ever steady. Now he held his right arm out before him and saw it shaking. Worse, upon entering the throne room, his shoes squeaked with every step. After listening to his many exploits, the king presented Bishop with his medal. Then Bishop made his squeaky exit from the room. The now Major Bishop spent some time in Great Britain, hoping to return to France, but it was not in the cards. Disappointed, Bishop then requested and received leave to return to Canada. He arrived in his home country to great fanfare. Awaiting him were his mother and Margaret, along with a crowd of military and government officials, reporters, photographers and spectators. The newspapers filled with stories of Bishop's feats and celebrated him as a Canadian hero. He was mobbed wherever he went. Public opinion for the war effort had turned sour in Canada, and new taxes were introduced to pay for the war. Bishop found himself used to help rally support for the war and encourage volunteers. He attended receptions, made speeches. He visited the Royal Military College and laughed along with his former instructors who only a few years before wanted nothing to do with him. He hated being used in such a fashion, but was constantly reminded by his mother, sister and fiancée that he needed to perform his duties and could perhaps embrace his role as a celebrity. On October the 17th, 1917, Billy Bishop and Margaret Burden were finally married in Toronto. Thousands of well-wishers lined the streets to see the famous couple. The two went on a brief honeymoon before Bishop was called to join a delegation headed for Washington, D.C. to help the Americans establish an air force. He spent the remainder of the year in the United States testing new aircraft designs and pushing production forward. Bishop was unimpressed by the American planes and expressed his opinion in a speech in Montreal that Germany will have nothing to fear from the United States air fighting forces during the coming spring because the American aircraft program is far behind schedule. When Mr. and Mrs. Bishop stepped off the ship in England, Bishop was greeted with the news that he was under arrest and could face a court-martial. Bishop, however, shrugged it off. He was, after all, Billy Bishop, the great ace, and there was still a water fight. As expected, nothing happened to Bishop over his criticism. He was lectured by Admiral Sir Godfrey Payne on the nuances of working with an ally during the war, and then given command of 85 Squadron, where he prepared them for duty in France. Two important events took place in April 1918 while Bishop trained his men. On April 1st, 1918, the Royal Flying Corps and the Royal Naval Air Service were reorganised into the Royal Air Force, and on April 21st, the great Baron von Richthofen was shot down and killed near Vaux-sur-Somme. During the last week of May, 85 Squadron completed their training and headed for France. Bishop finished a letter to his wife. "It's somehow good to get back closer to the war." Bishop picked up where he left off 9 months before, when he downed an enemy while flying near Ypres, scoring the first kill for the squadron. In a matter of a week, Bishop would pick up 8 more kills. Historian Peter Hart wrote of Bishop's leadership, "When he did come to command 85 Squadron on his brief return to the front in 1918, the unit was almost rudderless, as young, inexperienced pilots were given nothing to follow other than the example of his latest tales of wild success." Bishop feared his time on the front lines would be short, and he heard rumours of being sent back to England. The Canadian government did not want to lose their hero, but instead they needed his help in creating the Canadian Air Force. With such rumours swirling, Bishop, with his fierce competitive spirit, took to the skies to increase his record before he was unceremoniously pulled from the front. Each day he added more planes to his totals. Alan Hind wrote of these June flights, "He wouldn't eat, he fought, sleep, time was fleeting. He knew this wouldn't last forever. Afraid for himself? Hell no. Afraid of the War Office? They'd crack down on him before long now." Finally the order did come. He was to leave for England by noon on June the 19th. This order, however, gave Bishop plenty of time to go on one final early morning mission. He hid in the clouds while searching the air below for enemy planes. After a few minutes he spotted a German formation. He swooped in for the attack, destroyed 2 planes and caused 2 others to crash into each other. He was reluctant to return to the airfield and thus end his flying career, so he flew on until he saw a 2-seater reconnaissance plane. It was to become his 72nd kill. With that, Bishop's career as a fighter pilot came to an end. He returned to England, where he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, and in August was promoted to Lieutenant Colonel and ordered to Canada to serve in the new Canadian Air Force. On November the 11th, 1918, World War I ended, and Bishop was discharged from the Canadian Expeditionary Force in January 1919. His story would not end there. Bishop had never thought about life after the war and had no idea what he would do with himself. He immediately began a lecture tour through the eastern part of the United States, and after several months of non-stop travelling, he collapsed on stage in Roanoke, Virginia. His relentless military service and lecture circuit took a toll on his body. The doctors ordered him to rest. Reluctantly, Bishop cancelled the remainder of the tour and returned home to Toronto. He thought about becoming a teacher, but scoffed at the modest pay offered to him. Then another fighter ace, William Barker, came to Toronto, and the two became fast friends. They decided to start a small passenger airline, with the two serving as the pilots. This venture soon failed. In 1921, Bishop and Margaret moved to Great Britain to join various business ventures set up by friends. During this time, Margaret gave birth to 2 children, first to a son, William, in 1923, and a daughter, Margaret, in 1926. The Bishops became quite wealthy, which allowed Billy to live a life of leisure. He took up polo, where he was a teammate of Winston Churchill, and raised dogs. In 1928 he travelled to Berlin to meet German flyers, including Hermann Goering, and became an honorary member of the Berlin Aero Club. However, when the world economy crashed in 1929, the Bishops lost everything, and they returned to Canada. Another friend hired Bishop on at McColl Frontenac Oil Company. He would remain there until rumours of war began stirring. In 1936, Bishop was appointed as Air Vice Marshal of the Royal Canadian Air Force and tasked with building up Canada's air defences. He resumed his lecture tour, this time warning his fellow Canadians, "We cannot close our eyes to the possibility of war, in which event our most valuable contribution would be a trained air force. I plead with the government to devote more adequate funds to the expansion of the Royal Canadian Air Force." His warnings of war were echoed across the Atlantic by his friend and former polo teammate Churchill. Bishop was relentless in his goal to expand the Air Force when the war did finally come in 1939. Now full Air Marshal Bishop made sure Canada did her part. He was put in charge of recruiting, and in this he was so successful that there were not enough instructors to train all the new recruits. Canada's contribution to the British Commonwealth training plan saw the training of over 130,000 personnel. These pilots and air crews would serve all over the world, including in the Battle of Britain. Bishop even participated in several war propaganda films, but his tireless pace once again caught up with him. His health declined rapidly. In 1942 he had his pancreas removed and endured an extended convalescence. His son would write, "On February the 8th, 1944, he celebrated his 50th birthday. He looked 20 years older. A certain vitality remained, and the cheerful manner. These concealed the fact he was close to total exhaustion in body and soul." He finally resigned that same year, but he never fully recovered. He died in his sleep on September the 11th, 1956, at the age of 62. The legacy of William Bishop remained a controversial one for decades after his death. Many of his claimed victories had no witnesses. He would return from a flight and record in his log that he shot down certain planes, but there was never an independent verification of his claims. Many have accused Bishop of artificially inflating his numbers. His squadron leader signed off on the kills, but he himself did not witness all of them. Furthermore, the awarding of the Victoria Cross was odd, as it was based solely on Bishop's own testimony rather than the standard 3 witnesses. There was enough uproar over Bishop's kill score that the Canadian government launched an inquiry in 1985. However, by that time records had disappeared, so there was not enough evidence to decide one way or another. Bishop was an important symbol for Canada during the First and Second World Wars, and his service was irreplaceable. The government had no intention of disparaging the service of a war hero so many years after his death. Bishop's official score remains at 72 confirmed kills. He remains Canada's greatest ace. Thanks once again for listening. You've been listening to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast, written by Michael Gailey Gross, read by Nick Barker.